Hey, Crossroads Online, so good to see you. Welcome. I am so excited that you could join us here for Face Up Relationships Q&A. This past weekend, we launched a series called Face Up Relationships, where we're asking people, just like in a card game, where you don't show your cards until the very end, where you put them face up. In relationships, we want to just be authentic and put our hands right up and be able to get an opportunity to be able to share what it is that is going on in our lives when it comes down to relationships. And this week, we looked at dating. Pastor Jimmy hit a great message out of the park about dating, and we just want to thank you so much for that message. It was really good. How are you feeling?
I feel good. A little wore out, but I feel good. Yeah,
Awesome.
Love that kind of stuff.
Awesome. And then Pastor Brian is here joining us as well.
Love it. I'm between the two yellows.
There you go. Yeah.
And Jimmy, your nameplate is something else on there. Like I feel like I need to be like over here next to
we'll switch names next time.
Yeah,
that's
I love
for
it.
sure.
I love it. I love it.
Well, hey, about this weekend, tell me, I'm really curious. One of the great things that you said in your message was your first job that you had through your master's degree was selling women's shoes.
Yes,
Tell me,
was.
What was that like?
Please, more.
I joked and said that every woman feels like she's a size 6, and that's really true. Like, they do. But probably my most exciting story was kind of gross. Was, I don't know if I should say this, but here we go. A lady who was not a size 6, but was wanting to be a size 6. So I'm trying to put a size 6 on her foot. She's very old, and she said, maybe if you would just push that corn in that's on my toe, the shoe would go on. And I suddenly just went on break.
Yeah, so all of a sudden, yeah. Well, God bless you.
True story.
That is hard, man.
I promise. Mississippi.
That is fun. That is fun for sure. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I got more stories. If you no.
Yeah, let's take it easy with the stories for now. But hey, one of the great things that you said in your message was people don't lack information. We lack application and the truths and principles that God gives us for dating. When you said that, why do you think that is so true? And Pastor Brian, you can jump in too.
Yeah. I want to hear from you, man.
Yeah, well, I think that's true in a lot of things in life, not just dating, but it shows up in dating because, like I said, the heart wants what the heart wants. Our emotions get in the way. Our desires get in the way. Our preconceived notions get in the way. Our fears can get in the way. Like I talked about, fear of being lonely for the rest of your life or fear of, whatever. And it's like, those emotions, if left to their own, can be so persuasive, they can override what God's trying to tell us. And so, therefore, I think at some level, we kind of choose to avoid the application. We know the material's out there. We know the help is out there. But man, when the heart wants what the heart wants, we can kind of rationalize or steer clear of that truth to get what we want. And I've just seen that so many times with couples where it's like they come to me in crisis because way back when it could have been avoided, they did that. And it's a human condition. Like I said, it's not just dating. It really happens in all of life.
Yeah. I would say, too, like if you look at just Christians in general, I think that Christians, we use easy terms, like they know better than maybe they let on to. Because I don't think a lot of people are shocked to hear a lot of the things that you probably outlined this weekend. I don't think a lot of it was like, oh, I didn't realize that God should be a part of my relationship. Especially if you say that I'm a believer in Jesus. But that's where I really think this concept of spiritual obesity is such a true thing, that we consume so many spiritual calories. Maybe we'll come to church, maybe read a Bible study, maybe even, we look up on Instagram, we got all these little tidbits that come. But the reality is that if we never use those calories, we become spiritually obese, meaning that we never actually do anything with them. And when it comes to our relationship with Jesus, and it comes to especially our relationships with other people, we've got to be able to then be obedient to do what he tells us to do,
right?
Or we're just going to become spiritually obese and never actually do anything.
A lot of times too, Dan, I've talked to so many people who think, I never thought I'd end up here. Like, I thought I knew better, and I thought it was just kind of ingrained in me that I would just autopilot, just do the right thing. And surprisingly, that doesn't work. Was it 1 Corinthians 10:12 that says, so when you think you're standing strong, be careful that you don't fall. And I think a lot of Christians just kind of have this mindset, like, I've always been a godly person, I've always been a church-going person, and they're surprised when they end up in the weeds. And they didn't intend to. They really didn't intend to, but they just didn't think they needed the guardrails or they needed to apply the information that's available.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
Man, it's an amazing thing that happens when you're like, man, she's really cute, or he's really attractive. All of a sudden, all that stuff just kind of goes by the wayside.
Right.
You know, Bath and Body Works vanilla aroma is enough to be able to have your whole, spiritual upbringing go down the toilet.
I'm glad I didn't wear that today. That's good.
Yeah. So another thing you said in your message that was really powerful and has a challenge to it as well, like this tension between paying attention to the family history of the person that you're dating, what past hurts and pains they might be bringing into the relationship. And then also you and you shared on stage about your wife, with her permission, about both your stories, your family history were really rough, really hard. And so for someone out there who's listening who is dating someone with a rough family background, or maybe they've had a rough family background, maybe they don't even know who their parents' names are. But I'm curious, like, how do you find that tension of knowing, like, okay, despite the fact that they have a rough background, I know I can trust this relationship moving forward to pursue it because of X, Y, and Z. What do you think some of those key things are that okay, rough background, but we can move forward?
Best case scenario in that is if, even though they came from a messy family, which I said everybody comes from somewhat of a messy family, some different than others, if you can tell at the dating stage that their identity is not locked into that messiness, that their identity isn't defined by where they came from, but they're seeking to understand their identity is found in Jesus, that's a very hopeful sign. Because again, I also said that this isn't a black and white thing. You have to have realistic expectations, high standards, but realistic expectations. Our marriage was messy when we got married because we still had baggage left over, and the first 3 or 4 years was rough, and so we had to adjust. There's no guarantee that if you know exactly how they're handling their messy family, it's going to be okay. You might still have a rough road, but the key is identity. Is their identity lost in their messy history, right? Or are they in agreement with their messy history? Like if they're going to defend it, that might be something that you aren't going to see crack anytime soon.
And I think the easiest way to decode that is if they say things like, well, it's just the way I am,
Exactly.
Or, I grew up in an Italian family, and so we drink all the time. So, that's just who we are. If you like me, you like that. And
exactly.
In some regards, it's actually true. Like you either receive that or you don't receive that. And I think if we don't, at the very least, take that into the equation, I think that we're hurting ourselves a little bit. And I really think to me, if you think about the vows that we take with one another, like you say that I, Brian, take you, Cherie, who, when we got married, but it's this idea of I take you. And that's a powerful actual statement if you really think about it, because that is the culmination of the dating process in that one moment. That you have ultimately said, I've done the research, I've dated you, I've thought about it, I prayed about it, whatever. I've asked all my girlfriends, I've asked my boyfriends, and now I'm at the altar and I'm saying, I take you. So I'm taking all your faults, all your frustrations, all the things that I've learned, everything that I know, I'm taking that and I'm moving forward with that.
Yeah.
And so if you can't stand at the altar and say, I take you, knowing all this stuff, family background, some of the stuff we'll get to, then you probably should rethink that, right? You should probably have at least a moment so that you're not just getting married so you're no longer single.
There's a question I would ask people sometimes, and this sounds a little dogmatic, and it could be if it's used in the wrong way, but I would sometimes ask, it was more commonly the woman asking me this question, should I date him? Should I stick with him? And a simple question is, look at him right now and exactly how he is right now. Can you see yourself dating him and marrying him and living with him for the next 50 years just like he is? Right? Not a guarantee that he won't change, but there's not a guarantee that he will.
Right.
And you don't want to tell anybody that they have the power to change somebody, because like I said in the message yesterday, if you think you can change somebody to make them what you want them to be as a spouse, that's not going to happen, right? And if it does happen, then is that the reason you want them to change? Because that leads to its own problems. So the question is, I take you for better or for worse, all that stuff, right? Can you see yourself growing old, sitting on the front porch of the old folks' home in your rocking chairs together, eating fruit cup or whatever you do at that age, right? And with that person just like he is now. Because there's a better chance that he'll be that way than there is a chance that you're going to change him.
Yeah, that's really good. Really good insight.
There's always exceptions to the rule, and I don't want to tell God what he can and can't do, but I think trends and patterns wise, from what I've seen over the years, I think that's fair.
I think the example that comes to mind is I was talking to a married couple. They've been married for about 5 years, and she got married with knowing that he never wanted to have kids, but she desperately wanted to have kids. But she just assumed, in time he'll grow and he'll mature, and that'll be something that I can change his mind on.
Yeah.
Well, they come to me wanting to figure this out. Like, we have this tension. Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And it was a hard conversation to have because both had real reasons why they wanted to make the choice their way. But it's ultimately that beginning choice. Like, dating is so important to figure those things out. Can you be with them as they are and it not be a deal breaker?
Yeah.
So I think that's the part of the family card that we really didn't get a chance to unpack too much. Is that, yes, there's like family hurt in the past, but just that practical question of, do you want to have a family?
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes we don't get to, but yet, like if you said, when you get to that moment of like, hey, it's time to have kids. Oh no, I'm not gonna have kids. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And once you've said I do, you are beyond just the cordial dating. Like, I don't think this is gonna work. Like, you've entered into a covenant with God, and that's an important thing to consider. So, and also I would just say that we haven't spoke a lot about students also. So I think when you think about from a student's perspective, and I know I have a daughter that's 14, and then dating will happen in the next 20, 30 years. But at some point, right, when that happens, like, you want to be able to have them think through some of these things now, even though some of them might not be 100% applicable. I mean, when you have a teenager or something is dating, but it's really good to have a healthy view of what dating is.
Yeah, that's really good, really good. Well, we want to make sure that we get to your questions that you guys submitted this weekend. Throughout this series, you'll be able to submit questions based on the topic that was covered. Pastor Brian will be teaching a few of the messages coming up, and so you guys get a chance to be able to ask him throughout the weekend what that is, what those questions are, and we can use those to be able to lead this particular live stream. So
and Ashley too is here with us, so she's
yeah, and then Ashley, our chat host, is available as well.
Ashley.
Yeah, woohoo, way to go! But yeah, I want to let you know that you can, if you're watching this live, you can watch it later on Facebook, YouTube, or our website, crossroadsgrace.org/messages. And you can share that with a friend. I encourage you to share it with them because it's a great way to be able to help grow the conversation. So the first question that we have is, should I date someone who is dealing with mental health problems? How can I foster open communication with my partner to better understand their needs and feelings regarding their mental health?
Yeah, when I saw that question, I think the first thing that came to my mind was like, don't we all have some mental health issues? Like, I don't think, I think if you're walking into the relationship thinking like, well, I'm the purest mental person, well, I think that might be a mental problem right there, right? I think that there's so I think you have to be careful of that, and I guess I would just start that conversation. But I mean, you in the realm of Celebrate Recovery and with the amount of experience that you've had, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this to begin with.
Yeah, no, I agree. Obviously, we don't know the severity, we don't know the diagnosis and stuff like that. So I would say yes and no to the answer. I mean, maybe it's not healthy to date a person with certain kinds of mental issues or severe mental issues. Or maybe it's just okay to date somebody who's dealing with mental health problems that are less severe, right? But then even in that case, I would say it would require great patience. Because, listen, the reality is mental illness is so cruel because it has a way of limiting our potential when it's just got mastery over us, right? And that's why we want people to get help and find hope and stuff like that. But if I'm dating a person who's struggling with any kind of, let's just say common disorder, like you hear about bipolar, you hear about depression, you hear about things like that, okay? I've got to be willing to, in my being patient, adjust my expectations in a way. If I'm not sensitive to their needs, then I'm going to expect and demand them to respond and react and live at a certain level that I'm looking for, right? But maybe because of what they're dealing with and the struggles they're having at the present time, they're just not at that level. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
I've got to be willing to adjust my expectations so I don't come across as cruel or demanding. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Look, mental illness is awful. Any kind of mental illness is awful. People struggle with it. You know, and so if I hold these expectations here, but the struggle that they're having and that they're trying to deal with just is holding them down to here. Okay, it's not a less than and better than kind of thing, but my expectations are too unfair, too high, and the gap in between where they are and where I'm demanding they be, this becomes disappointment or judgment. And so if I'm going to date somebody, or if someone's going to date somebody who's struggling with mental health issues, you've got to be able to have realistic expectations, lots of grace, because they're people that struggle with mental health conditions don't want to, right? And they hate it more than anybody, you know. And so that requires just a lot of gentleness, patience, and very realistic expectations, balanced with resisting the temptation to think you can fix them, that you're here to fix this person, you know, and you can't. That's not your job. So,
well, I would probably interject a couple things here to that, and everything you said is true. I think in light of our Face Up Relationships series that we're in, I think that you need to have a face up relationship, open conversation about those things too. So if you're dating someone that just is oblivious to what they're going through, that's a big trigger, a thing, something to kind of think about. And then I also would ask the question of, okay, am I aware that this is an issue, and then also what am I actively doing to help it, or to minimize it, or whatever it might be. So if you have if there's one thing about being undiagnosed and then being diagnosed.
yes.
If you're undiagnosed, that's nobody's fault, because you didn't know. You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
But if you've been diagnosed and you know, then I think that's something, one, you should be able to share with one another, and because that's a vulnerability, and that's a thing that it strengthens your relationship in the end. And then on top of that, to be able to say, hey, I realize this about myself. These are some steps that I'm taking to be able to do that. I would love your support in that. Not that you're going to fix me, but just to rally around. And then I do think that when you get to that point of I take you, I think that's one thing you have to factor into the I take you conversation. So it's really important. But again, I'll start with where I began, that we all have something that we're wrestling with. So,
of course.
You know, no one is perfect. So you have to understand that. Especially even in today's day and age, where more and more is surfacing that maybe before would have been push it under the rug, suck it up, rub some dirt on it, you're okay. Yeah. I think more people are sensitive to the mental aspect of our person, and I think it's important for us to realize that too.
You mentioned that no one's perfect. How do you balance that tension between finding someone and having a high view of the type of person that you want to marry? Maybe you've been divorced, maybe you're widowed, maybe you are a teenager who is having fun in dating but not really serious. How do you balance that tension of having a high view but also too high of a standard, where you end up dating no one and you never get married, maybe even potentially? So how do you find that balance in there, do you think?
Yeah. You think?
Well, I think you gotta be honest about your expectations, and sometimes that's hard. Sometimes people have blinders on, that their demands are too high. It would take that person realizing that their standards are too high, and they're not allowing grace for people that are not perfect. I think I know what you're saying, and it makes me want to say that's a very convenient saying. Nobody's perfect, you know, and we don't want to use that as an excuse for not trying to not be perfect, but be excellent, or have integrity, or grow, or something like that. But I think I don't know. I think that person has to realize somehow, if their expectations are too high, maybe they have someone that can speak into their life and help them see, listen, you keep passing up on these really good guys, right? And because you're looking for perfection. Perfection doesn't exist, you know? So I don't know. It's difficult. It's really hard.
You pointed out a good point. Never date alone, in that you are in community with people who love you and know you.
Yeah.
And as you're looking for someone, you have people that are going to call out, you know what? You may enjoy this now, but it's going to be miserable for you. Or, are you an idiot? Why are you dropping them? Go for it. Like, this is the one.
Yeah.
Having people in your life that are in community, that are dating with you in that way.
Yeah.
That's a great way to be able to know, like, are my standards too high, in order to really balance things. That's why community groups, growth groups are so important, because that can be people that can really invest in you to help you.
Well, it comes down to vulnerability. Like, am I willing to let somebody into that space of my life to be able to give you permission to say, hey, I'm gonna filter some things past you, and maybe it's not just dating relationships, but other things, so that you can have more than, Scripture tells us that those people that have wise counsel have the best reward from that. Proverbs says that over and over in different ways. So, and then I think also it's similar to the old adage of, like, when you're getting a job and you're holding out for a management position, and you never work because you never get the one that you're. So I think having that sounding board is really important. But I do think that you have to understand your priorities when it comes to a relationship too. That if we talk about being a Christian relationship, that God is our number one priority, that and if they check that box, then I would continue down that road as far as you possibly can, because that is really a rare jewel. And I think that's important. So, but your point to community is really important, but I would say priorities, adding that in there, and then also understanding that God does some pretty profound things, usually not in the way that we think, because it doesn't match our spreadsheet. So make sure that we're open to what he's moving in.
That's really good.
Dan, I just want to piggyback on that. That's so important what Pastor Brian just said, that we need people to speak into our lives. I mean, it's really hard to do life alone.
Yeah.
And if people try to do life alone or choose to do life alone, and they don't realize that they are having too high standards in their selection of who they're going to date and everything, then they're just gonna miss it, and there's no way around it. But that's why it's so important to have somebody we trust that has permission to speak into our lives, not just in all things, and not just to criticize what we're doing or to point out what we're doing wrong, but someone who just helps us past our blinders, because we all get blinders from time to time. I have people that can speak, into my life, and I've had that for years and years. I can't imagine life without it. I miss so much of my attitudes, behaviors, choices because of my blinders sometimes, and thank goodness there's people who can speak to that. And it's not always easy. I don't like going to the dentist, but I'm glad I did. I don't like talking to my sponsor, but I'm glad I did. So
that leads us really to our next question. What about dating within the church? What if the relationship does not work out and you still have to see that person at church, right? The fear, like, okay, it seems like a good place, right? Okay, they keep God first, probably. Maybe church is the right spot. But, am I going to have to find a new church if it doesn't work out? And new friend groups? Like, how does someone manage that?
Well, I see that question quite a bit. And I always say, wouldn't you rather meet somebody in church than some, like, I feel like, you said something that I think sometimes we will assume, like, hey, they're coming to church, so they must have God first. And I would say no.
Right.
I think there's a lot of people that just see church as something they check off the box. I think there's something deeper that needs to be there. But then also to remember that church is full of a bunch of imperfect people. Like, no one coming here is going to be perfect. And it's also not a meat market. So we're not like, put a stick up in the air and say, hey, I'm dating.
I'm single.
Yeah,
please talk to me.
Yeah, right.
Meat market.
So I think that's important to consider. But listen, I would say if you are entering the church and you happen to bump into somebody that seems like they match some of the personality traits and the things that you're looking for, I think it's a great thing. Now, if it doesn't work out, I'd also think that we need to be mature believers in Jesus to understand that this is, we're going to be okay. You don't have to cut off your entire life. You don't have to switch your churches. But that, to me, comes to more of a maturity thing. Now, there's always that caveat that if that person did something that was abusive or anything like that, then goodness gracious, the leadership needs to know about those types of situations. But if it was just like, it just didn't work out, then there's lots of people that are in this church right now that they used to try to date, but they no longer have, and they still coexist and are doing great because it's a maturity thing. And I would say don't let that hold you back from pursuing something, because I think it's a great place to meet somebody.
That's good. Jimmy, what do you think?
I was dying to hear his answer because I see that question all the time too, and I'm like, man, it's difficult. You date somebody in your friend group, and then you break up, and then you got to see that person at church. I think the answer is maturity. I think the answer is, look, that's why we need Jesus in our lives. That's why we need the power of God, because that's difficult. I don't know, and I loved your answer because I was really kind of not sure what the answer is, except, man, it's difficult. Other than and I don't even, this is just unfiltered thinking here, which is maybe a mistake, but here we go.
Yes, let's go.
Maybe when you're dating somebody in your friend group, you have enough sense to know we might break up, and if we break up, what are we going to do? Not like a prenuptial agreement, so to speak, but maybe just like a conversation like, listen, these are both our friends, this group. If we break up, what are we going to do? Or we can agree that, look, we're going to be mature about it. We're going to pass each other or whatever. Other than that, I think that's a tough question with an imperfect answer.
Yeah, I would always caution of coming in with a fatalistic attitude.
You
always have to be careful of that. Like, hey, this is really great, but when we break up, I really think it comes down to maturity, and again, that there's different reasons why different things happen.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
That's a really great question.
Next one is, as a Christian, should we be dating with the purpose of marriage or follow NATO, which stands for not attached to outcome? That's a new one. I haven't heard that before. So which one should we do? Which one should we do?
Well, I've never heard that one before either. So if I'm understanding it right, since the first part of the question is, dating with the purpose of marriage, which a lot of people on the survey, thank you for the survey, said they were, or just, holding it loosely, seeing how it goes. I think, number one, that depends on what the other person thinks. Because you don't want to be NATO and they're super serious, because that's going to be a problem, right? Like if someone's dating you because, man, they want to get married, but you're dating them because, like, it's pretty fun, hanging out and everything. So I think that conversation has to happen, or those cards have to come up to say, okay, like, where are you at with this, and where am I at with this? But I think either one is fine. I think really, some people are casually dating because they're just want to have fun and friendship date and stuff like that, which kind of is becoming more and more in our culture. And then some people are dating with somebody who they hope to marry one day. And I think one becomes the other. I think the casual dating naturally would probably be seen as the one that becomes a serious dating. I think that's a healthy transition. But so I think they're both okay.
Yeah, I would make sure that you really understand what NATO really means, because NATO could be just like, just we're having flings and it doesn't really matter, and just this whole like fluidity of relationship that seems to happen in these generations right now, and nobody actually plants their flag in the ground and says, hey, I'm dating or not. I think you made a good point about in your message about that going on dates and then dating is a different sort of fluidity or adjustment in the relationship. So if you're just going on dates, then I think that's okay, because there used to be this old kind of purity idea back in the 80s and 90s, the idea of like kiss dating goodbye, and you never date unless you're going to date the person you're going to be married. Like and now on the rebound side of that, you hear a lot of people that are hurt because of that, because of this misperception of what he meant. Even the author that wrote that book now has kind of steered away from Christianity altogether, which is another whole thing we talk about. But what I would just say is that if you move past going on dates to now say, hey, we're dating, I think that is a transition that you've made. Just like water moves from liquid to a solid, there's a transitional state there to move it to a new state. I think that now, when you begin the dating process, I think that then marriage should be in your mirror or in your windshield. Because if not, then I don't know whose time are you wasting? Like what are we really doing?
Right.
Because the thing that I don't think people really factor into this is it's time. Like, you're giving of yourself, you're giving of your time, you're giving of this that you'll never get back. So sometimes I think that if we are serious about that relationship and we are now dating and not just going on dates, then it should have an eventual movement towards marriage. Or I think you might just be kind of wasting each other's time, and at the end of it being kind of saying like, wow, that was fun. Well, see you later.
Yeah, never get those years back.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it's really important to keep boundaries in perspective when you're looking at your attitude towards dating. Is dating towards marriage or dating towards just having fun?
Yeah.
And I think the next question really kind of fits in with that. Me and my girlfriend struggle with physical boundaries. We have tried to stop, but we inevitably cross the boundaries we try and set up. How far is too far?
We can have all kinds of fun with this question. I know. I spoke first last time, so why don't you?
Oh man, I was taking a drink of water, hoping
did
that was.
I'm
All
ready.
right.
There's your
I want to
signal.
go.
There's
All
your
right.
signal.
Well, first and foremost, accountability. You gotta have somebody that is asking you the tough questions. We can't do these things alone. Some things in life are just too hard to do alone. The physical part of relationships is a natural thing that God put in us, designed for our husband or our wife, but it's still there. And so the first thing is to have accountability, somebody who can ask you the tough questions. We got there's so many sayings in recovery, but one of them is, if you talk it out, you won't act it out. And so if you have someone that's asking you the questions and you have to answer, like, how was a date? How, what happened? How did you hold up and everything like that? If you've got to confess something you're not proud of, that might alter your decision making the night before, because you got to speak to somebody about it. So having somebody help you with your boundaries, help you with your accountability, literally someone you have to report to, because it's that difficult. And realistically, that's a very difficult part of dating. Obviously, I mean, we all know that. That's a very hard one to harness. And so I would say, just right off the bat, accountability.
That's good. Well, I really think if you boil it down, it comes down to a very singular question. And the question is not, how close to the line can I get? I think the real question is, how much do I really want to be like Jesus? Like, let's just be perfectly honest with it. Because Hebrews 13 is going to tell us, it says that marriage should be honored by all, the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexual immoral. So, like, God's desire is for that marriage bed to be pure. Like, so do you really, really want that? Like, do you really, really want that? Like, if that is what you desire, then you put in safeguards like that. Then you don't ask the question of how close can I get to the line. You ask how close can I get to Jesus together to be able to do that. And really, I when I look at this question, I really feel like this is just a maturity question that I sit down with couples all the time, and that from a premarital standpoint, and the ones that are committed to it, they are committed, and they'll be honest. Like, it is hard, it is difficult. But they have a goal in mind that this is important to both of them.
Yeah.
So if it's only important to one person, it's very difficult.
Right.
And so I think that's important. So
we have a really good question that Veronica has asked here, and I really trust our team to be able to answer this one. It is, I'm 62 years old and married. I want to know what to tell people that believe it's okay to date or even marry same sex. Many lies out there.
So that really saying that same-sex marriage is okay.
Yeah.
Right. Basically.
Yeah.
Right?
What does she do? Maybe it's I don't know her particular situation. I've never met Veronica before. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's someone that she's close to or not close to.
Yeah.
I think those are all things to consider when answering the question.
Yeah, I'd probably have to hear it one more time.
Sure.
But as far as, are the people that she's referring to Christians? They not Christians?
Doesn't say.
Okay. Yeah, so that always is the tipping point for me. So if we have people that say they believe in Jesus, then the conversation has a different choose-your-own-adventure story to it. That you then have more theological discussions with them about what God says and what the Bible says and the purity aspect of that. If they're not believers, and they're not, then really what we're offering them is just our own personal opinion on this certain situation. But we also can't then hold them to a set of expectations that they're not ascribing to. I use that old analogy, like if we're playing golf and I try to judge your golf game on the rules of football, that's not fair because those rules aren't the same. So unless we're saying, hey, we're in the Christian camp, and then we can have discussions about how God has created us as man and woman, that he's reserved that union between one man and one woman, that a man leaves his father and mother, cleaves to his wife. We hear it in Genesis all the way through Matthew. Jesus reiterates it. So it has both Old Testament and New Testament purity to it and devotion to it. But ultimately, if they're saying, hey, we're not Christians, we're just doing this thing, then it really comes into more of a evangelism conversation as opposed to a personal this is what you should do, because this is where Christianity gets like if we treat every situation as a nail and we just are nailing everybody that doesn't even believe in Jesus, yes, we've gone the wrong way. We need to share Christ with them so they understand that first before we can do that. But I don't know. What do you think?
No, I totally agree with that. And you build relationship with people that are thinking that way. There's nothing wrong with building friendships with them, earning the right to say those very important things. Because that's a very sensitive situation. But yeah, I totally agree 100%. Sometimes we just come at it with a shotgun and try to get everybody to behave like Christians do. The reality is not everybody sees the world like we do. Not everybody believes in God. Not everybody is interested in church. But if you're even having that conversation, or if they feel safe enough to talk to you about it, man, that's a really good sign. Just build on that. See how you can deepen that relationship, that friendship, and just I really think that Jesus showed love first, and then he earned the right to say what he wanted to say to people who now want to hear him. And so, we can demonstrate the love of Christ very easily just by suspending judgment, right? Not treating them like we think they should act, and just loving them as people.
And understanding that we don't water down what Jesus says, we don't change what the gospel says, we don't alter what the Bible says. We stand on the truth of what God says. It's the manner in which that we share that information and share our heart and our soul with people that I think really matters the most. The old adage, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so to this person, obviously that's a very personal question, and that's probably somebody that they care about. And so maintaining that relationship is really important, while also not losing your convictions of what Jesus says.
Absolutely. Hey, Veronica, thank you so much for sharing that question.
So
I really
much.
appreciate that. And we're praying for you. I'm gonna put some resources in the chat. If you want to stay on till the end, I've got some great resources for you that would be very helpful. Awesome. So the next question is, I'm in my late 30s and am single right now. Should I focus on finding someone to marry or embrace singleness and try and trust God's timing?
Yeah. Why don't you go first on that? Yeah. Because I can talk all day, but I want to hear from you.
That word focus is kind of tricky right there. You don't want to go hunting down a spouse, and just go on a spouse safari kind of thing, right?
What does that even look like?
Right,
Disneyland Jungle Cruise is what I'm thinking through right now.
And so, and not poking fun of the question. This is an excellent
question.
No,
it is a great question.
Right? Because maybe the thoughts are, time's running out, the clock's ticking, I don't want to be alone and stuff like that. I think the safest thing to do within the framework of this question is, yes, embrace your singleness, because that's what it is right now. It's okay. This is where God has you at this moment. And trust God's timing. I think that's a very fair way that this question was posed. Should I try and trust God's timing? Yes, I think that's a really good thing. There's kind of I've heard this said before, the best time to find a spouse or a dating partner is when you're not looking for one, and so that could mean God's timing is such that he caused your path to cross and, interest to spark and stuff like that. Yeah. I think if we're focusing on it and we're hunting it down, so to speak, we got to be very careful between the tension of following God's will and following our heart and listening to our emotions. If there are emotions involved, like, I'm afraid if I don't find a spouse, I'm going to grow old and alone, And
if we're not careful, we can make anything an idol, like something that becomes our sole focus.
Yep.
So if we're on hunting for a spouse safari, that becomes our sole focus. But I do think it's important to remember what Paul does tell us, that in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, he says, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it's better to marry than to burn with passion. So what Paul is saying is like, hey, it's actually a good thing to be able to be single. In fact, he says I would actually encourage it. Because then he goes on to say, because it lets you focus on God more and what the different things that he's called you to do, and that's important. But if you desire that relationship, then you want to make sure you do it within the context of a marriage. Now, here's the thing. You could go out right now, and the way that our world works, you could, any sort of dating app or anything, you could start dating just like that. Like there is no shortage of people that you could date. There's even no shortage of people that you could marry. I mean, you could go down that path, but you and I have met with many people. You have met with several people where the most painful conversations that I have are people that just hurried up and got married and never thought about what you want to know the loneliest position to be in? Marry somebody that doesn't believe in Jesus and then be like stuck in this marriage for for how who says how long. So that I think is important. And then also he goes on in chapter 7 to say something I think that's so important for us to remember. In verse 17, Paul says, "Nevertheless, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them, just as God has called them." So whatever situation, we still have our priority of God. Like it's got to be number one in our lives.
Exactly.
And if that becomes our sole focus, then we don't have the time for idols in our life. And all of a sudden, maybe there's a relationship that comes up. But and then I just want to throw this one little nugget in here. I have seen that when the older that people get, and they maybe have not gotten married yet, I see the standard being lowered because they just don't want to be alone anymore.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. And so I think that that's something to keep in mind, that there is no like timetable. Like the older you get, the less you have to follow God, right? I think that we need to keep in mind that it's for our benefit that it's there, not to rush past it. So
That's really good. The next question is, how do I balance my responsibilities as a single parent with my desire to have a fun dating life? Should I seek a partner who also has kids, or is it risky to date someone without children?
Yeah, these are beautiful questions.
These are very good questions. Yeah.
Well, I always come down to pyramid of priorities: God, spouse,
Yeah.
kids, everything else. Like you have to have your priorities in the right order. Now, as my friend would say, he would say that pyramid is great, and except when divorce starts to happen, and you have kids, and you're starting to blend pyramids together, because then you have to say, well, do my kids from my old relationship, do they go underneath my new spouse that wasn't their dad, and like how does that all work out? And so that's a very difficult pyramid blending situation to come to, and you've probably seen that quite a bit. You know? How have you wrestled with that?
Well, the patterns are always the same. It's just very difficult.
Yeah.
You know, it's very, very difficult. It requires great patience, because you have one parent becoming protective over their children versus the other parent being protective over their children. And so there's got to be great communication. There's got to be great patience. And foundationally speaking, I can't imagine doing that without the Lord in our lives. Like that is such a hard thing to do. So how do I here we go. I focus on finding. Oh, wait. Sorry, I'm on the wrong question.
Number 6.
Number 6. Yeah, is it risky to date someone without children, or should I seek a partner who has kids? That just depends. You know, that really just depends. It could be the greatest thing ever to find a partner with no children, you know, and to bring them in. And it sure would be easier if they wouldn't have children to compete with the kids that are already there. But that is an area where you really need to seek God's wisdom on that.
And it comes back to pyramid of priority. You don't seek someone that has kids. You seek someone that loves Jesus first, and then you move from there. And if they have kids, then we go through that path. But you seek somebody that loves Jesus first.
Absolutely. So, how do I talk to my kids about me dating after a messy divorce, especially if they still have hopes that me and my spouse will get back together? How important are my children's permission in my dating life?
Yeah, as I thought about that question, I think the word permission is an interesting word, because permission gives the ownership and the power to the child to then dictate to you whether or not you can date or who you date. I think there's a difference between permission and input. So I think involving them in the conversation and having them, you know, not every night, and you know, here's a new person I'm dating, here's a new person I'm dating. That's very different, right? That you, as somebody that has decided to date someone and then maybe moves to dating, which is moving towards marriage, then you need to shelter your kids from when is the right time to be able to introduce that person into the relationship. But I also would say this to those who have gone through divorce, is that I oftentimes see people, and maybe you've seen this too, that they'll have a messy divorce and they will very quickly try to get into another relationship without ever really allowing the healing process for that divorce to happen. Not just for them, but for their kids as well. And so I just would be very cautious to be able to say, hey, let's jump back into the dating scene. Either I don't want to be alone, I don't want my kids to be alone. Financially, it's really difficult as a single parent. Like, oh my goodness, just be very careful of that. depending on who you ask, some people say that it's a month for every year that you've been married that you should wait. Some people say you can't even start to think about a relationship until after a year has taken place, that you go through all the seasons with that. I think if you have kids in it, it even maybe goes a little bit longer
Yeah.
because